Let's continue the conversation now with broadcast TV station owner Armstrong Williams. Armstrong also serves as the business manager for Dr. Ben Carson. He joins us tonight from his office in Washington, D.C. Armstrong, as always, we really appreciate your time here on Newsmax Prime.
Congressman, it's always a pleasure.
Now, Armstrong, you have been in Washington for quite some time, but have you ever seen a greater disconnect than what we just witnessed with the Obama administration and its foot dragging over Christian genocide?
You know, the administration is consistent. If it were an issue that had to deal with Muslims and Islam, anything other than Christian values, this administration would be front and center. They've always shown us that they don't care as much about the struggles of Christians, the threat to our freedoms, the threat to our livelihood, to our way of life, than they do these other special groups, which they seem to think deserves more sympathy, more financial support, more legislative support, and not to impede their way of life in any kind of way.
You know, Armstrong, I believe it was the National Prayer Breakfast a few years ago that really brought Dr. Ben Carson to the attention of most Americans. In retrospect, do you believe that breakfast and the speech Dr. Carson gave that day was the catalyst that ultimately persuaded him to run for president?
Well, on that day, many Americans got a chance to see not the world-renowned pediatric neurosurgeon, but they got the chance to see someone who cared about this country, who understood health care, the consequences of affordable care, which we're realizing today, understood what will happen if government had little respect for the people, try to limit their rights and their freedoms, what America would begin to look like. And certainly that was the impetus for where Dr. Carson is today.
Now that the campaign belongs to the pages of history, how would you characterize Dr. Carson's presidential campaign and his subsequent decision to endorse Donald Trump?
Extraordinary. Only in America. Someone who has come from a poverty background in Detroit, who was given no chance to succeed in the classroom, against all the odds, embraced discipline, sacrifice, faith in God, faith in family, and faith in America, and rose, whether it was at the University of Michigan or Yale, where he eventually became a world-renowned pediatric neurosurgeon, to the director of pediatric neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins University. I mean, it is an amazing story. It's what I would say to the good doctor often. It doesn't matter, Dr. Carson, what the outcome for you in this presidential bid. There is no losing hand. You can only win.
You know, Dr. Carson appeared on Yahoo News after making his endorsement of Donald Trump. Let's listen to what the good doctor had to say about those earlier attacks that Donald Trump used against him, and then get your reaction.
He said, it was political. He was concerned about the fact that he couldn't shake me. I understand, politics, and particularly the politics of personal destruction. And you have to admit to some degree that it did work. A lot of people believed him. And when all those things were proven not to be true, they just sort of forgot about it.
It was pretty tough. He compared the good doctor to a child molester, and yet there is Dr. Carson saying, well, it may have worked, and he endorsed Donald Trump, which I'd like to get your reaction to that. But also, do you believe that Donald Trump will be the GOP nominee?
Yes, I do believe that he will be the GOP nominee. And not only did Mr. Trump use those scorched earth tactics against Dr. Carson, but against the Bush and the Bush family, against Senator Rand Paul. I know many people would like to say that Mr. Trump is bigoted and racist, but I don't believe that. I just think that Mr. Trump feels that he's the only one that belongs on that debate stage who can bring America what they're looking for, who can relate to their anger and the resentment against the establishment media. But I think Dr. Carson represents something that we should never forget, and that is temperament, discipline, and respect. You may criticize people, but there are certain lines that you don't cross when you're a presidential candidate. And while Dr. Carson certainly has endorsed Mr. Trump because he wants to unify the party, I don't think it ever would have happened had Mitt Romney had not come out and taken his position, telling the American people, the GOP, not to vote for Mr. Trump. I thought Dr. Carson saw that as someone who's trying to usurp the will of the people, and how dare these party bosses step forward and try to tell us how we should vote. He felt that Mr. Trump earned the respect of the American people. He worked hard for it. He did not necessarily embrace or oftentimes agree with his tactics, but it was the will of the people. He certainly had no pathway to the nomination. And as Mr. Rubio has shown, he has no pathway, nor does Mr. Cruz. And so the people have spoken. Dr. Carson recognizes the will of the people. He embraced Mr. Trump in an endorsement, the unified party, because he felt there was something greater at stake in this year's election, and that is to make sure that we don't continue the policies of President Obama in the name of Hillary Rodham Clinton, and we don't continue the policies that are very destructive to America and our way of life.
And we will have to leave it right there. Armstrong Williams tonight from Washington. You have our thanks.